Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Special Counsel Jack Smith submitted a revised indictment today against former President Trump in the D.C. January 6th case. The change comes in response to the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity last month. Smith had requested a 3-week extension for the filing due to ongoing discussions with the Justice Department. The Supreme Court tasked him with distinguishing presidential acts from private acts. To get around presidential immunity, prosecutors added a line in the indictment that names Trump as a candidate for president rather than as the president. He's still charged with 4 counts of conspiring to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Trump has pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. Turning now to the 2024 election, the debate on debates seems to be over, at least for now. Trump confirming he will debate Vice President Kamala Harris on September 10th, given new assurance by ABC about the rules. It comes as Trump's bringing 2 former Democrats to his transition team. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
After a fresh round of tussling, former President Trump says he has reached an agreement with Democrats to now proceed with an ABC News debate scheduled for September 10th in Philadelphia. That's after he said on Monday,
"We agreed to the same rules and same specifications. And I think that's probably what it should be."
Earlier this week, Trump questioned the credibility of the ABC network as the team said Harris's camp had asked for a seated debate with hot mics and notes. But Trump made clear on Tuesday that, quote, the rules will be the same as the last CNN debate. He says ABC assured him that it will be a fair debate in which both candidates will need to stand, cannot bring notes, and will not be given questions in advance. While Trump didn't specify it, the same rules will also mean that both candidates' mics will be muted when they're not speaking. The Harris campaign, meanwhile, has accused Trump of trying to back out of the debate due to fear. He has not responded to Trump's latest statement. Meanwhile, both candidates are now trying to expand their base by showcasing cross-party support. Trump on Tuesday announced that he's now bringing in RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard to his transition team, which will help him pick policies and staff for a potential second administration. The 2 former Democrats just endorsed Trump in recent days.
I invite you to join me in doing all that we can to save our country.
And don't you want a president that's going to make America healthy again?
The Democratic National Convention also features several prominent Republican speakers, and on Monday, over 200 former GOP staffers endorsed Harris over the former president. Reporting by Iris Tao, NTD News.
And a Harris campaign spokesperson indicated that Harris hasn't necessarily agreed to the rules that Trump outlined in the Truth Social post, saying, quote, both candidates have publicly made clear their willingness to debate with unmuted mics. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg said the Biden administration pressured the company into censorship, blocking content related to COVID-19 on Facebook during the pandemic. Zuckerberg added that he regrets some of the decisions made in response to the government's requests. NTD's Christina Corona has more on the story.
Mark Zuckerberg sent a letter to the House Judiciary Committee on Monday, August 26th, claiming the Biden administration influenced censorship on Facebook's parent company. He wrote, in 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree. The letter was shared on the committee's Facebook page and on its X account on Monday. During the pandemic, Facebook also added misinformation alerts for users who interacted with false COVID-19 content. In August 2021, Facebook removed over 20 million COVID-19 posts for violating its content rules on its main site and Instagram. That year, the White House criticized platforms like Facebook and Instagram for spreading coronavirus misinformation. Zuckerberg has regrets and said he's prepared to push back in the future. Ultimately, it was our decision whether or not to take content down, and we own our decisions, including COVID-19 related changes we made to our enforcement in the wake of this pressure. I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it. A White House spokesperson told Politico that during the pandemic, the administration encouraged responsible action, saying, our position has been clear and consistent. We believe tech companies and other private actors should take into account the effects their actions have on the American people, while making independent choices about the information they present. Zuckerberg also expressed regret for Meta's decision to downplay the New York Post's coverage of Hunter Biden before the 2020 election, which the FBI had flagged as potential Russian disinformation. That fall, Zuckerberg said his team temporarily demoted reporting from the New York Post, alleging Biden family corruption while their fact-checkers could review the story. He wrote, "It's since been made clear that the reporting was not Russian disinformation, and in retrospect, we shouldn't have demoted the story." Meta has updated its policies to prevent future issues, including no longer demoting U.S. content while awaiting fact-checking. Zuckerberg's letter highlights the ongoing debate over content moderation on social media. Reporting from the city of El Monte, Christina Corona, NTD News.
New Hampshire health authorities have reported that a resident who tested positive for the mosquito-borne Eastern equine encephalitis virus has died. The New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services announced today that the recent death marks the state's first case of the rare virus in a decade. The adult resident was hospitalized with severe symptoms affecting the central nervous system. About 1/3 of those infected with the virus die from the infections, and survivors often suffer long-term mental and physical disabilities. Currently, there is no known vaccine or treatment for the virus. The health department also reported that the virus has been detected in one horse and several mosquito batches in New Hampshire this summer. The Israel Defense Forces have rescued a hostage in the Gaza Strip. He was found in a tunnel during what the Israeli military called a complex rescue operation. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
A newly rescued hostage was happy to be in the hands of Israel Defense Forces on Tuesday after spending 10 months in captivity in the Gaza Strip. Israeli forces said they rescued him from inside a tunnel in a complex operation, but they did not give many details as it could hinder other rescue operations in the future. Shortly after Israeli forces rescued him, 52-year-old Qaid Farhan al-Qadi was flown to a hospital in Israel, where his family members were seen running to meet him. Al-Qadi, who is a member of the Bedouin community in southern Israel, was taken hostage on October 7th when Hamas terrorists kidnapped over 250 people and murdered over 1,200 in Israel. And while in the hospital, al-Qadi got a phone call from Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
I want you to hug your family, and I want you to know that the whole nation of Israel embraces you. And also the others, we will bring them.
Al-Qadi's brother spoke with reporters afterward and said their mother had a dream that he would return.
Can't express my feelings. I hope my mother will be happier than us. We prayed for him. My mother prayed for him more. Her prayer reached the sky.
The CEO of the hospital said al-Qadi appears to be in good condition, but will require another day or two of medical tests to make sure he is okay. There are still 108 hostages remaining in the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu said Israel is trying to release them through negotiations and rescue operations, both of which he said require military presence on the ground. And on Tuesday, an Israeli airstrike hit a building in al-Nusrat in the central Gaza Strip. The Hamas-run health ministry said no deaths were reported, but 7 people were injured. Israel also released video of Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon entering a military structure. Then Israel struck the building. This comes just a day after Israel and Hezbollah exchanged fire across Israel's northern border, but without further escalation. The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown, told Reuters that the near-term risk of a broader war in the Middle East has eased somewhat. But he said Iran still poses a significant danger as it weighs a strike on Israel. White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby said the U.S. remains committed to defending Israel in any Iranian attack. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Russia says the West is, quote, playing with fire by aiding Ukraine. The Kremlin is now adjusting its nuclear weapons doctrine. The Pentagon is already responding to Russia's threats. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pasdar has the update.
Ukrainian officials said a hotel was completely destroyed on Tuesday. The strike killed at least 2 people. In total, at least 5 people were reported dead across the country after Tuesday's attacks. Ukraine downed half of the incoming missiles and 60 out of 80 drones. President Volodymyr Zelensky is asking allies to consider providing different missiles.
Each of these strikes repeatedly brings us back to the task of long-range capabilities, the need to provide our defense forces with enough long-range weapons that can destroy terrorists exactly in the areas of their strikes.
The Pentagon responded to Zelensky's requests for permission to use long-range weapons.
I won't speak for President Zelensky. Clearly, he's made his views and perspective well known, both publicly and privately. As it relates to long-range deep strikes into Russia, our policy has not changed.
He added that the U.S. will continue aiding Ukraine with short-range missiles. Ukraine often uses those to hit Russian weapons close to the border. Russia on Tuesday said the West is playing with fire by aiding Ukraine.
The West does not want to avoid escalation. The West, how we say in Russia, is looking for trouble. It is very important to understand that we have our own doctrine, including doctrine on use of nuclear weapon, which is, by the way, being adjusted now. And American representatives are well aware about it.
But the Pentagon rejected the accusation, saying it's not looking to increase tensions.
We're not at war with Russia. We're not seeking conflict with Russia. We are simply supporting a democratic nation who was invaded 2.5 years ago and enabling them to protect themselves.
Tensions between the U.S. and Russia are at the highest they've been since the Cold War. Russian President Vladimir Putin previously said the last time the relation was this bad was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is in China speaking with Chinese officials. This comes just after the U.S. condemned the Chinese regime's recent actions in the South China Sea. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more from the White House.
The U.S. may begin escorting Philippine vessels across the South China Sea to avoid Chinese aggression. Commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Samuel Paparo, said so in Manila on Tuesday. That comes a day after the Philippine Coast Guard said the Chinese Communist Party used 40 vessels to illegally block the Philippines from carrying out humanitarian resupply missions. Watch.
Certainly within the context of consultations, every option between the two sovereign nations in terms of our mutual defense, escort of one vessel to the other is an entirely reasonable option within our mutual defense treaty among this close alliance between the two of us.
On Tuesday, a State Department official doubled down on condemning the Chinese regime for its aggressive behavior in the South China Sea. Rear Admiral Andrew Sugimoto, Deputy Commander of the Coast Guard Pacific area, condemned the Beijing's aggressive behavior. He said, quote, "I think most nations out there see that as unsafe and unprofessional conduct, which only highlights and further emphasizes the bullying that's going on." Now, this is just ahead of closed-door meetings between National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, the top foreign diplomat there. They'll be talking about fentanyl as well as China's support for Russia's war machine and a range of other topics. Take a look.
President Biden has been very clear in his conversations with President Xi that he is committed to managing this important relationship responsibly. And the outcomes of the Woodside Summit and the work we have done since then demonstrate that we are working to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict, and that we find ways to work together where our interests align.
Now, this all comes after the Biden administration last week announced that it's imposing over 400 new sanctions on companies and individuals, many of which based in China, for supporting Russia's war against Ukraine. The talks between Sullivan and the Chinese officials will continue on until Thursday. Reporting from the White House, Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A federal judge in Texas has paused an administration policy that would give certain spouses of U.S. citizens legal status without having to first leave the country. The pause comes just days after 16 states, led by Republican attorneys general, challenged the program. The policy could benefit an estimated 500,000 illegal immigrants and about 50,000 of their children. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has the immigration update.
16 states filed a lawsuit to halt the Biden administration's Keeping Families Together Act last week, arguing it would incentivize illegal immigration and cause irreparable damages. Texas said in the suit it has paid tens of millions of dollars each year for services like healthcare and law enforcement because of illegal immigration. President Biden announced the program in June that offers eligible spouses of U.S. citizens a path to citizenship. Applicants must have lived in the U.S. for at least 10 years, not pose a security threat or have a criminal history, and been married to an American citizen by June 17th. Eligible spouses must pay a $580 fee to apply, and provide a list of documents to prove how long they've been in the country. Those approved would have 3 years to seek permanent residency, and can get work authorization during that time. The Texas court order lasts for 2 weeks, but could be extended. It comes just 1 week after the Department of Homeland Security started accepting applications. District Judge J. Campbell Barker said the claims are substantial and warrant closer consideration. He laid out a timetable that could result in a decision shortly before the presidential election, and gave both sides until October 10th to file briefs in the case. Louisiana took additional steps to make sure non-citizens aren't voting in elections on Monday. Governor Jeff Landry signed an executive order for all state government agencies that provide voter registration forms. The order says the agencies must include a written disclaimer that non-citizens are not allowed to vote or register to vote. This as the U.S., Colombia, and Panama pledged to better coordinate regional migration policies. Officials agreed to collaborate against transnational criminal organizations that exploit migrants.
It will further our work to promote regularization, improve control and regulation mechanisms for those in transit, bolster information sharing, and address mechanisms of protection for the vulnerable.
Roughly 500,000 migrants crossed the Darien Gap to reach the U.S. last year, a dangerous jungle route on Panama's border with Colombia. The three countries reaffirmed a commitment to addressing migration with a multidimensional approach, emphasizing human rights and shared responsibility. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
A Latino civil rights group is requesting a Justice Department investigation into a series of raids conducted by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton's Election Integrity Unit. It's part of Paxton's voter fraud inquiry in the state. The League of United Latin American Citizens says Democratic leaders and election volunteers were targeted. A group director says documents, computers, and cell phones were seized in the raids. One Texas state senator says he's asking for a state Senate probe. Paxton's office says it doesn't comment on investigations that are still underway. Texas Governor Greg Abbott says names of illegal immigrants that voted over the last 3 years were being sent to Paxton's office for possible legal action. Meanwhile, Governor Abbott says more than 1 million people have been taken off the state's voter rolls since Senate Bill 1 was signed into law. He says that includes non-citizens, deceased voters, and people who moved to another state. Abbott says the removal process is ongoing and that illegal voting in Texas will never be tolerated. He says about 1,900 non-citizens voted in Texas in the last 3 years. Vice President Kamala Harris is continuing her focus on swing states. Her campaign has released a new ad that highlights her plan to lower housing costs. Her team is also hitting several spots on the East Coast this week. NTD's Jason Blair has the latest.
The Harris-Walz team announced a new 1-minute ad campaign to, quote, communicate her plan to lower Americans' housing costs. It's part of a previously announced $150 million media blitz running in August. Harris-Walz Battleground States Director Dan Cannonen said, quote, Vice President Harris knows we need to do more to address our housing crisis. That's why she has a plan to end the housing shortage, calling for the construction of 3 million new housing units and cracking down on corporate landlords and Wall Street banks, hiking up rents and housing costs to bring prices down for our families.
For most of my childhood, we were renters.
The ad highlights Harris's mother's story of saving up to buy a home when Harris was growing up. And on the campaign trail, the team says it's hosting nearly 20 events across 12 states this week. Second Gentleman Douglas Emhoff was in New York Tuesday afternoon speaking at a campaign reception. And Governor Tim Walz will speak at a convention in Boston on Wednesday. He'll also join Harris in the battleground state of Georgia on the same day for a bus tour. This will be their first time campaigning together in the state, according to the team. And on Thursday, Harris will give remarks at a rally in Savannah as the bus tour goes through South Georgia. And also in Georgia, Democrats have sued to block state election certification rules. They say they want to make it clear that election superintendents must certify results by 5 p.m. November 12th, 1 week after Election Day. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
And NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the new Georgia election certification rules, which Democrats say could lead to post-election chaos in the presidential battleground state in November.
The lawsuit was filed in Georgia State Court by the Democratic National Committee, the Georgia Democratic Party, and Democratic members of several county election boards. It takes aim at two rules passed recently by the Georgia State Election Board. The rules allow election officials to conduct a reasonable inquiry before certifying election results. They also permit members of county election boards to investigate ballot counts. The lawsuit marks a significant escalation of a controversy that has been brewing for weeks over the action of 3 Republican members of the State Elections Board. Former President Trump recently praised the 3 by name during an August 3rd rally in Atlanta, calling them pit bulls fighting for honesty, transparency, and victory. Republicans argue the rules simply reinforce a county election board's existing duty to thoroughly examine election results. State Republican Party Chairman Josh McCoon called the changes common sense and says they will benefit all Georgians regardless of political affiliation. McCoon says they are designed to increase transparency and public confidence regarding elections. Democrats say the rules invite post-election chaos. They are seeking a court ruling saying election superintendents can't delay the certification of election results or refuse to certify the results altogether. They are asking for the court to declare that election superintendents must certify the results of the November 5th election no later than November 12th unless they have a valid judicial order to the contrary. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, Democratic lawmakers are publicly praising Vice President Harris's economic plan, while Republicans criticize the lack of specifics. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez brings us their reactions.
I have one of the first congressional offices on a college campus, and one of our top requests for constituent services is on housing insecurity, because we don't have enough affordable housing, we don't have enough inventory near opportunity, and we don't have enough opportunity for renters to become homeowners.
The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a nonpartisan watchdog group, estimates that Harris's housing plan would cost the federal government over $200 billion.
And I will work to pass the first ever federal ban on price gauging on food.
On social media, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson called Harris's price gouging ban a new Soviet-style economic plan that has been tried many times before, and it has failed miserably. Speaker Johnson also highlighted that Harris bears responsibility for crippling high prices Americans are paying for everyday items like gas, groceries, and car payments, in reference to Harris's tie-breaking vote to pass the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. Democratic Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey defended Harris's price gouging plan as sensible and ordinary.
She let out specific plans that really relate to like 40 other states' plans to stop price gouging. 40 other states' actual laws to stop price gouging.
Republican Senator Marco Rubio compared Harris's price gouging plan to the price controls imposed by the Venezuelan and Cuban regimes, while Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell defended the lack of details of Harris's economic plan.
But she knows what she's going to have to do. She's going to have to spell out her vision and talk about policies more.
According to reporting by Politico, at least 6 Democratic lawmakers believe that the proposals have no chance of passing through Congress, even if Democrats flip the House and maintain the Senate after November 5th. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Earlier, we spoke with Anders Corr, publisher of the Journal of Political Risk and principal of Core Analytics, about Sullivan's visit to China. Anders Corr, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
Now, the talks are expected to cover a wide range of topics, from the conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine, China's claims in the South China Sea and Taiwan, as well as fentanyl and trade. Now, what do you see emerging as the top priorities?
Taiwan is one of the biggest priorities for China, obviously. The other one is the issue of basically U.S. sanctions and technology export controls on China. These are in response, of course, to China's aggression but they're also moving towards, basically penalizing China for some of the things that it does, whether it's fentanyl. On our side, it's going to be fentanyl is a big issue. Taiwan is also a big issue. I think both sides want to avoid a war, but both sides have a different idea of what the outcome should be in Taiwan.
And do you see these talks or foresee these talks stabilizing relations between Washington and Beijing or leading to any breakthroughs?
I think the hope on the part of Washington is that they will stabilize the situation at least until the election. They want a stable situation going in there. If there were a significant increase in violence in the region, that could hurt Kamala Harris's election bid.
Now, Sullivan will be the first U.S. National Security Advisor in China since 2016. That was during the Obama administration. Now, he has held talks with Wang Yi elsewhere, like in Bangkok this January. But how significant do you see this visit by Sullivan, or what is it telling us about the relations between the U.S. and China right now?
One of the most interesting things that Sullivan is trying to get are military talks down to the theater command level. Now, that would be the Eastern Command, which would include this area right across from Taiwan, but also Southern Command, which deals with the South China Sea. And that's kind of an interesting proposal that I haven't really seen much elsewhere. But in general, I'm not sure that we're going to see a lot of major changes in terms of the talks. The sides are pretty stiff. I mean, I would say that what you saw the day before the talk, there was a Chinese Air Force incursion into Japanese territorial space. That's the first time it's ever happened. They send out 2 a day around Japan that forces Japan to scramble their fighter jets, but never actually into Japanese territorial space. So that shows that China really isn't budging, and in fact, they're making new changes on the ground that will improve their negotiating position.
Given that, what do you make of Sullivan going to China right now versus, say, Antony Blinken, Secretary of State?
Sullivan is probably the choice because, it hasn't happened for a long time that a national security advisor has gone to China. Blinken is, I'm sure, very, very busy in the Middle East. I think that's been a focus of his over the past months. And I think, but of course, China is the major pacing threat, the biggest security threat to the United States long term. So I think they wanted someone with gravitas, as young as Mr. Sullivan is, with gravitas to deal with the China issue.
And expanding on that, following this meeting, how likely are we to see a meeting between President Biden and Xi Jinping?
That's a very good question. I think it's up in the air. If they have an agreement that can be developed between Sullivan and the Chinese foreign minister, then you might get something, sort of a meet and greet where they just sign the material. But I don't see President Biden being a major part at this point of the negotiations. And I think Kamala Harris would be involved in any decision in advance of an actual deal.
On that note, given this is an election year, whoever is the next president, whether that's former President Trump for a second term or Vice President Kamala Harris as president, how should the U.S. deal or in its relationship with the Chinese Communist Party?
Chinese Communist Party is attempting to expand its power geographically, internally within China, and also in terms of its direction of international organizations, essentially trying to rewrite the international system to its advantage and against the United States. So I think the most important thing is we need to make sure we're not giving stuff away for free. There's an incentive for an administration that's facing re-election to get some kind of deal, any deal, to look good on paper before an election, and I think that's a major risk that we carry right now.
Underscore, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
SpaceX is pushing the launch of its Polaris mission to tomorrow. The company said it was taking a closer look at a helium leak. SpaceX is hoping to conduct the first ever commercial spacewalk with this mission.
4 private astronauts are set to be flown farther than any human has flown since the end of the Apollo era. The mission, dubbed Polaris Dawn, will be launched by SpaceX at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Originally scheduled for Tuesday, SpaceX says it is examining a piece of equipment that is designed to detach from the rocket during takeoff. Launch is set for early morning Wednesday. The crew consists of billionaire Jared Isaacman, 2 SpaceX engineers, and retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Scott Poteet. Once in space, Polaris Dawn will cross 2 dangerous bands of radiation. The crew is eventually hoping to attempt a high-risk spacewalk and test some brand-new SpaceX-developed spacesuits.
We are all really confident that, some iteration of it is going to be worn by somebody walking on Mars someday, and that just makes it even more of a privilege to be part of it.
The 4 plan to travel as far as 870 miles from Earth, more than 600 miles farther into space than the International Space Station. While there, the crew is set to do roughly 40 experiments. A former NASA astronaut spoke about the significance of the mission and the risks involved.
What's really exciting about what's happening with the Polaris mission is the amount of information that's being taken. So they're going through the, one of this very high orbit, going through the Van Allen belts and the radiation that they may receive. And really trying to understand how is that mitigated.
Meanwhile, astronauts Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore are stuck on the ISS. What was supposed to be an 8-day mission has turned into more than 80 days. NASA announced Saturday a SpaceX Crew 9 Dragon spacecraft will come to their rescue. They are now slated to return next February at the earliest.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start in tennis, where women's top-ranked star Iga Swiatek started off the U.S. Open with a win. How did she look?
I mean, actually not as sharp as she normally does. Not only is she #1 in the world, she won this event 2 years ago. Now, she won in straight sets today over Kamila Rakimova, but she's ranked 104th in the world. She committed a number of unforced errors, 41 in total. Of course, at the end, though, she was at her best. This ended in a second set tiebreaker. She was down 6-3 to start, but she won the final 5 points to seal the win. So she moves on to the second round. Now, joining her there in the second round, Naomi Osaka, who's won this event twice before, as well as 16-year-old American Iva Jovic, became the youngest American female to win a match here in more than 20 years on Monday. Now, meanwhile, fellow American Danielle Collins, ranked 11th in the world, was upset in the first round. Now, she had announced back in January this was going to be her final season on tour, citing, among other things, her desire to be a mother. So probably not how she wanted to go out on top, but a happy retirement to her anyway.
Now, on the men's side, top-ranked Jannik Sinner also advanced today. This is just days after avoiding a suspension after testing positive for a steroid back in March. What was the reason given?
Well, essentially, it was accidental, was the ruling. Now, the International Tennis Integrity Agency determined a ruling of, quote, no fault or negligence, so he was able to avoid any kind of punishment. They determined the positive test was actually a result of contamination from a team member. This is a physiotherapist who used a substance on their skin and then gave him a massage. Apparently, it was a very small amount found in the system. But this was actually the same substance that resulted in a half-season suspension for baseball star Fernando Tatis Jr. 2 years ago. I think it'll be interesting, though, to see how players react to this, though. There's always skepticism around these failed drug tests. So as this event goes on, I'm sure we'll hear some players' reactions as we go on.
Moving to NFL news, we've had a number of transactions this week as teams trim their rosters down to 53 players. What are some of the more significant moves being reported?
Well, the Chiefs reportedly cutting Kadarius Toney is a significant move, even if it's not that surprising. Now, he was a first-round pick just 3 years ago by the New York Giants. The Chiefs got him for a third-round pick in 2022, but he never really found his way with the Chiefs. Then this offseason, the Kansas City really overhauled the receiving room. He seemed like a casualty waiting to happen. I think he'll find a home somewhere else, though. I mean, he's only 25, very talented. Meanwhile, Arizona reportedly cut quarterback Desmond Ridder, which is surprising because they just traded for him in March. Now, I would have to think he'll find a home somewhere else as well. He started 9 games for Atlanta last year. He's only 24, so not really huge names this time. But meanwhile, the regular season starts in just 9 days with the Chiefs hosting the Ravens.
Shifting gears to baseball, while Aaron Judge is threatening to break his own home run record, Shohei Ohtani is on pace to be the first member of the 50-50 club, meaning steals and home runs. Would this feat lose some significance given the new rules that favor base runners?
I mean, yes and no. It is a different era. Now, they've changed the rules a bit to encourage players to steal more bases, and it has made it easier now that pitchers can't throw over to first base that many times, plus the bases are a little bit wider. But some 50 years ago, I mean, they did something similar when they lowered the pitching mound because offense, they needed more scoring in the game, and scoring did go up after that. So the game is really always changing. I mean, 100 years ago, you didn't have those specialized relievers like coming in 8th inning, 9th inning, throwing 100 miles an hour. You didn't have the designated hitter back then. Really, in any case, though, only 6 players still have only hit 40 home runs, stole 40 bases in a season under the old rules. No one's done 50 and 50, which is what he's on pace to do this year. If Ohtani did, at the very worst, you could say it was equal to a 40-40 under the old season. So I think this is just going to be a new era in baseball, and no asterisk beside it or anything like that. That's just probably how it's going to be understood.
Well, Davis, always thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
How well do you know Ronald Reagan? The new movie Reagan shows the life of a man with humble beginnings. He ultimately became the 40th president of the United States. The film tells Reagan's story through the eyes of a former KGB agent.
Welcome to your life.
The cast and team of Reagan came to the movie's premiere near Nashville, Tennessee on August 25th. Jannik, host of American Thought Leaders, spoke to the team, including Dennis Quaid. The lead actor said he took a year to prepare for the role, from practicing Ronald Reagan's speech patterns to personality.
I really had a streak of fear go up my spine when I was offered it because I felt unworthy and also afraid because, you know, everybody has an opinion on Reagan. He's one of the most famous people recognizable in the world. But that fear is usually a sign that I should do that because it takes me out of my comfort zone. And that's what God does too, you know.
The new film shows the journey of Reagan's humble beginnings and becoming the 40th U.S. president.
I think that we all have a purpose in life, that whatever you are, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, that there's something you're supposed to do before you leave the planet. And it's hard to find that. In Reagan's case, he doesn't find it until he's 69 years old. So that gives the rest of us hope that we can find it at some point in our lives, the thing that you were put here to do, as his mother says.
What would you say is the issue of our time?
No question about it. Communism and the Soviet Union.
Get in the game.
Screenwriter Howard Klausner discussed the challenges of capturing Reagan's persona.
And it was a band of brothers. We all had the things we wanted. My original draft was 212 pages. Can't do that in a feature film. So it's been hard to choose. Well, we can't do that, but let's try this. So it's been a labor of love, for sure.
I was working with a producer about 15 years ago doing another movie, and he said, I'm going to make the Reagan movie, and I want you to play Nellie. We share the same faith, etc., and I was honored to do it. It took 15 years to get there, but Nellie had an enormous influence on Ronald Reagan. They were very close.
Senator Marsha Blackburn and actor Nick Searcy talked about the movie's timing.
So many people are talking about how do we preserve our freedoms and liberty? How do we make certain that people appreciate that this is the land of opportunity and preserving access to that American dream? And I'm like a lot of moms and grandmoms. I want my kids and grandkids to dream those big dreams. And it's up to us to give them the opportunity to make them come true.
I think the parallels between what Reagan fought for in the 80s and the struggles he went through are very similar to what's happening now. And I think it's still the battle against communism. It's still the same things that Reagan fought. We're still fighting that battle today. So I think this movie's coming out at the perfect time.
There's nothing a retired governor can do about the Soviets, but a president. Now he can do a thing or two.
Reagan is hitting theaters on Friday.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.